Gente, bom dia. Vamos começar. Welcome everyone to our panel, Social Responsibility and Ethics, a 20-year retrospective. So we organized this panel because, as we've already talked about during the conference, it's been 20 years since our first IHC, and as we've been talking throughout these days, we've seen so many changes in these 20 years, and especially regarding the impact of technology and the ethics concern that we have with technology. So all of our panelists have been working with computer science, HCI, for over 20 years. So we invited barely. So we invited them to share with us their views on these changes and the things that we have to look forward to as well. So I'll call them to come and upstage, and then we can start. Please welcome Professor Clarice de Souza. Clarice is a full professor of the Department of Informatics. Clarice is a full professor of the Department of Informatics at the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro. She has a PhD in computational linguistics from PUC-Rio and is known in her work in semiotic engineering, a semiotic theory of HCI. Because of her theoretical contribution to HCI, Clarice has received several awards in her career, including the ACMC Doc Rigo Award in 2010, the Chi Academy Award in 2013, the IFTC 13 HCI Pioneers in 2004, and one of the 54 notable women in computing selected by the CRAW Anita Borg Institute in 2014. The Brazilian Computer Society SBC Scientific Merit Award in 2006, and the SBC Seiki Outstanding Career Award in HCI in 2017. She is the author or co-author of 4 books on semiotic engineering published by MIT Press, 2005, Morgan and Claypool, 2009, and Spring International, 2012 and 2016. Her 2016 book extends the reach of semiotic engineering research in order to account for meaning-related aspects of software design and development. In 2017, she took a sabbatical leave from PUC-Rio and spent 1 year as a senior researcher at IBM Research Brazil, investigating meaning, coding, interpretation, and explanations for data-driven machine learning systems. Her research is currently funded by CNPq, the Brazilian National Council for Scientific and Technological Development. Thank you, Clarice. I'll do it the other way now. I'm going to read the short bio first, then I'll call the person up, and then you clap, okay? So next, I'm going to call Professor Virgílio Almeida. So Virgílio Almeida is a full professor of computer science. So, okay. Virgílio Almeida is a full professor of computer science at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, UFMG. He's also faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard University. Virgílio received his PhD degree in computer science at Vanderbilt University, a master's degree in computer science at PUC-Rio, and a bachelor degree in electrical engineering from UFMG. He held visiting positions in several universities and research labs such as Harvard University, School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, New York University, Boston University, Santa Fe Institute, and HP Labs. Virgílio was the National Secretary for Information Technology Policies of the Brazilian government from 2011 to 2015. Virgílio is a member of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences and the Academy of Sciences for the Developing World. A complete list of publications you can find online. Thank you, Virgílio. So next, I'm going to invite our international speaker, Christina Huck. So, Christina, for many years, she has led a research center named Mobile Life 2007 to 2017. The whole center was committed to playfulness. Their credo was, always engage, always create, always enjoy. Their aim was to upgrade emotion, experience, playfulness from their position as the less valued pair in the rational, irrational, thinking, emotional, male-female dichotomies. During those years, she formed an agenda and named Soma Design based on the pragmatist philosophy and in particular the notion of Soma aesthetics. She now leads a research group at the Royal Institute of Technology, KTH, in Stockholm, Sweden, committed to designing with their bodies in an ethically defensible manner. So, thank you. Our next panelist, Victoria Bellotti. Victoria Bellotti is recently reformed research scientist, psychologist, ethnographer, UX researcher, now working in industry. Prior to arriving at Lyft in March of this year, she was especially interested in human motivations for different kinds of economic and lifestyle choices, especially transportation and health. Now she's able to apply her expertise to helping make Lyft's various services more attractive and safe for users. She's a proud member of the Sikai Academy in recognition of her scientific contributions, even though she's not doing much academic research these days. Being at the startup in hypergrowth is a very different way of life and with little time for writing papers, but she's learning a lot from her incredible enthusiastic new colleagues. Thank you, Victoria. Last but not least, I'm going to invite Professor Cecília Baranauskas. Cecília Baranauskas is a full professor at the State University of Campinas, Unicamp, Brazil, currently affiliated as collaborator at the Institute of Computing, where she developed her academic career. Co-founder and former coordinator of the Nucleus of Informatics Applied to Education at Unicamp, currently member of the board of directors of the UNESCO Institute for Information Technology and Education. Her formal education and academic collaboration include Bachelor in Mathematics, Bachelor and Masters in Computer Science, and Doctorate in Electrical Engineering at Unicamp in Brazil, 1993. Honorary Research Fellow at Staffordshire University, 2001, and Visiting Fellow at the University of Reading, UK, in the Laboratory of Applied Informatics with Semiotics. Ibero-American Cátedra, Unicamp Santander at the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid, Spain, 2006, studying accessibility issues in software engineering. Her research interests have focused on HCI, organizational semiotics, and design of interactive computer-based systems in different domains, social, educational, work. She has led several projects with the support of funding agencies, having supervised more than 60 master's, doctoral, and postdoctoral theses. She has received several awards for contribution throughout her career, such as the Diploma of Educational Merit, Professor Darcy Ribeiro in 2006, from the City Hall of Campinas, the ACM SIGDOC Rigo Award in 2010 for contributions to the design of communication field, the first SBC HCI Career Highlight Award in 2015, the Unicamp Academic Recognition Zeferino Vaz in 2016, Research Productivity Fellow of the National Research Council, and her full CV is also available online. So thank you, Cecília. So we'll have each panelist will present their position for around 5 minutes, and then we'll have time for discussion with the audience. So I'll ask Clarice to start, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Raquel, for inviting me. It's really I am honored to be in such prestigious company, and I'm honored to be addressing such dear audience. So we're going to be talking about our 20 years of achievement in the Brazilian HCI community, and I will pick just one position. There are many positions, so our panel here is going to explore different positions. So the particular one that I'm interested in is, as you will see, what it really means to say that people matter. This is a community who knows that people matter, right? And we have begun with user-centered design by looking at individuals and, you know, trying to figure out what their needs and aspirations are, and we are trying to address their opportunities, and we are trying to do good to individuals. And then we've progressed, we've moved on from there to social computing, and we have designed technologies that can enhance our social interaction. And then we have moved from there to where we are right now, and to what our keynote speakers have explored in their talks, which is, in my version, the socially responsible computing, right? An aspect of what we do. And this involves ethics. Everybody has talked about ethics, and this involves values. And my reading of ethics and values is that culture matters, right? Because this is where we find, you know, the supra-individual instances of human life, and this is where we find the supra-individual instances of human values. So, you know, I was reading back to stuff that I had done because of the opportunity we have here in our Brazilian HCI community. And as you know, I have been trying to learn more and more about semiotic engineering, and I thank you all researchers in semiotic engineering who have been helping me learn about that. And as far back as 2005, when I wrote the first book on semiotic engineering, I picked up this passage where I was saying that, I was talking about ethics actually. So I was saying that my deeper argument in favor of the theory is that semiotic engineering questions an implicit ethics of HCI, according to which users definitely don't need to know more about computers, they just need to be able to use them, right? The theory shows that, as a rule, that was back then, designers and developers have been building computer artifacts that are not meant to be known. And I thought, well, gee, right now we are on the same page, right? So we have technologies that are not necessarily built and designed to be known. They are built and designed to be used, right? So I love to work in theory, so I don't have this wonderful lab that Christina has, and I don't work at Lyft. Maybe I would be a fiasco at Lyft, but the thing is that I'm always concerned about theory because this has been my way into computing. This is how I have come to the computer science domain, let's say, because I am a stranger. I was first a stranger. I was trained as a linguist, as you have heard Raquel say. And one of the things that really struck me from the beginning, you know, I love this book because this is the one that I read to get literacy in computer science. And the first chapter in this Bible of computer science is called Computer Science, the Mechanization of Abstraction. And it really, you know, gets me going to read that, right? So the value of abstraction, sort of fleshing out everything that is contingent, that is socially situated, that is, you know, some sort of a distraction. We want to go right to the abstract core of things. So the question is, at whose expense are we doing this, right? And this year I was invited by Simone Barbosa and Gilbert Cocteau to write a column in Interactions, this abracadabra column that I find delightful. It's like, you know, if you had a magic wand, what would you do, right? And my point there was a bit weird and provocative, and I was trying to say, if I had a magic wand, what I would do is to try and bring HCI into core computer science, right? Virgilio yesterday was saying, at some point in his talk, he said, well, you know, computer theorists are not worried about that, but then software engineering, blah, 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 blah. And my point is, computer theories should care about that, right? And the parallel I have in mind is what happened in linguistics, in fact. Because we're, you know, children of the same parent, Noam Chomsky. So in linguistics, Noam Chomsky was trying to say that language description had to be done in the abstract, right? That you would have universals, you know, that would be in everybody's minds, etc. And then there were those pragmaticians or semioticians saying, but wait, if you look at how people use language, the things that you're saying are not quite right. There are some variations, and Chomsky would say, don't bother about that. And, you know, the essence is in the abstract, is blah, blah, blah. So what happened for a long time in linguistics is that all the theory about language use was being developed by people who were not linguists. So they were not at the core of language description. They were not core linguists, right? So what I see in computer science is a very strong parallel with that situation. What I see is that the theory of computation has been developed without any concern to how computers are used in socially situated environments. And this is at the expense of everyone in this room and everybody in this world, right? So my position in this panel is, let's take HCI into core computer science. Let's go into the theory of computer science and do to computer science what pragmaticians have done to linguistic descriptions in linguistics, for example, right? They have provided the theoretical instruments for you to deal not only with linguistic description in the abstract, but also language use in very concrete and socially situated questions, right? So part of what I have been doing is, in semiotic engineering, is to try and trace how meaning is inscribed in software throughout the development of software engineering. And for example, yesterday, while in Virgilia's talk again, I was wondering about what it means to develop software as, you know, a bunch of components that get Lego-wise architectured in this way or that way. And so my position is, how do we move from abstract problems to asking culturally situated questions? And I propose that this has to be done by bringing HCI into core computer science. Thank you.
Well, good morning to everyone. I'm delighted to be here with this group of experts in HCI. I feel like an outsider here. I'm not from the area, and I don't know exactly if what I'm going to say will fit the idea of this retrospective of 20 years in HCI. So I'm not going to talk about HCI, but I will try to show what has been the impact of the digital technology on society and what can be done to minimize the downside of that, and also try to maximize the use of the benefits of the technology. Well, if we look back in the press, what we see, especially in the recent years, is a lot of headlines about the impact of the digital technologies. And most of them have been negative, and a big impact on society all over the world, not only in the developed world, but in the emerging economy countries. And we see a lot of headlines about fake news, about impact on the electoral processes, about the impact on privacy, the growth of hate speech, and a lot of problems that have been caused sometimes as intended consequences of the evolution of the technology. And we can see here, actually, I read an article in the New York Times 4 weeks ago about the impact of IoT of the use of IoT by abusers in many families in the U.S. People that understand the technology try to impose some restrictions on the partner using ways of controlling thermostat and lights in a house. So we see that there are many possibilities of causing problems because of the evolution of the technology. My work, my academic work, has always looked at system problems, but maybe in the recent 6 years, I've been concerned about what can be done to minimize the problems that we see with the technology. So I changed a little bit the focus of my research. And there are many events around the world that somehow are shaping what we call the cyberspace. We can start here with the Snowden revelations in 2013 about surveillance, and surveillance that was done by US agencies, and they monitored political leaders such as Angela Merkel, the president of Brazil at that time. So it was a big event that shows how powerful it is, the technology, and how can it be used by different political forces or different economic interests to do what they want to do using technology. So Snowden was a big event. WikiLeaks was another one, so that bring to society the importance of privacy and show that this is a concrete problem. We're not talking about abstract things. That's something that affects the lives of everyone. And then in Europe, it came the right to be forgotten policy that was important for a citizen to try to control its public policies, removing certain answers from the search engines. And then IoT became popular, and we see IoT everywhere, in the car, in the house. Social media got a lot of press, and more than 2 billion users make use of social media features every day, and as a consequence, you have seen the proliferation, the dissemination of fake news and hate speech. On the other side, we see the society claiming for some sort of regulation in order to create some sort of order for this digital world. And we see the growth of algorithmic decision-making that affects the personal lives of individuals. And recently we saw the impact of Cambridge Analytica in the US elections, and also in the Brexit process in UK. So there are some global pressure for global governance, and more recently we see the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe that will have a lot of impact on HCI and also in everywhere in the development of applications and software. And now we see what is going to be the impact of AI. So that's the big picture that if we look in the global context, that these are some key events for that. So what can you do? An evolution of the cyberspace, we can look at the different narratives that show the evolution of the cyberspace. In the previous decades, we had that evolution concentrated on infrastructure, to build the infrastructure, networks, computers, and also software. Then, in the last decade, the last 10 years, we saw a lot of technical innovations. So what we are going to see now and in the future is some demand for policy regulation and governance. So that's basically a picture that represents what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to work with what I call evidence-based policies for digital governance. I want to collect data and try to propose, to create mechanisms for analyzing those policies based on data. What we see is that most of the policies are proposed without any evidence. GDPR is one of them. They are proposed by politicians, by lawyers, but they don't have empirical evidence for that. And we are talking about a connected age where some small change may cause a lot of problems in other areas. So basically, I'm trying to work with people that are trying to do quantitative research to provide evidence for public and private policies. And again, the question is that we are based on data. So I'm going to skip off that and finish that. I had some ideas to show, but so that's we have to work on models of governance for that. So that's a challenge that I propose for this community, because ethics is very important, but we need policies to enforce ethics. And just a final message. Technology, and I agree with Clarice in many positions. It's another one. Technology without values is a danger to humanity. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Virgilio. So next I'm going to call Christina Hook, please.
Sorry. So my name is Christina Höök, and I come from the Royal Institute of Technology, and I think most of you were here yesterday, or the day before yesterday, when I did my keynote. Okay, so maybe this is mainly for you who weren't here. I wrote up this based on the idea of what happened 20 years ago, and thinking a little bit about where we still are with some of the issues. So I work within the third wave of human-computer interaction. And I guess you all know about the first, second, and third wave of HCI. I'll just go briefly through it. So in the first wave, as you know, the technologies was like one machine, one PC, and therefore we had one user. We had to care about that person's individual cognition. It was mainly used in workplaces, and there was an interesting interplay of power that you could use to make sure that those systems were ethically and value-based good systems for people. Because it was in a workplace, then you have organizations like unions or laws, regulations, and whatnot that you can use to regulate what is going on here and how to design these. Then we were networking those computers, and then suddenly we had this influence of, social behavior, and again, it was mainly in the workplace. And so again, the powers, the unions, the employers, the workers, were there balancing one another in a way. Now, when we come to the third wave of HCI, then suddenly all of these technologies moved into every walk of life. So they moved into our homes, onto our bodies, into our ways of playing and socializing and whatnot. So we had to care about experience, and now suddenly digital interactions are everywhere rather than the workplace. So to me, the first issue I'd like to bring up for the panel, I think sort of connects really nicely to yours, and that is about power. Who has power over this development? Because now we're consumers. We're using all of this media, and so I don't know, is it the designers that have any power? Is it commercial companies? Or is it perhaps journalists that write about these technologies? And who's got power? And I think without speaking openly about the importance of balancing powers, we are not doing ourselves a service. So designers cannot control this, nor can consumers, nor can media. We need to think carefully about how to balance these powers. Second, when it comes then to how do we deal with what is going on right now in human-computer interaction, in our methods, in our ways of doing design and so on. And I think my first problem there, and I actually wrote a paper about this if you want to look up more in detail what I was thinking. The problem of scale is suddenly hitting us because technologies are everywhere. Not only that, we're scaling up to billions of users. We're scaling up to technologies that suddenly go from one context to the next, like work tools entering into the home, where we suddenly have calendars controlling our leisure time activities. And we also have ecologies of artifacts. It's no longer enough to care about how I design one particular system. I have to understand how that particular system ends up in a whole ecology of layers of artifacts working together. And the effects of that are really hard for us to understand. And I think our methods in HCI are lacking. Sorry, we need to actually think differently and work differently if we're going to meet the issues of scale. In particular, my own favorite lovely field, research through design, a lot of our work is mainly about designing one singular system, like a well-integrated vertical thing, rather than caring about the fact that this particular design is going to be in the context of a bunch of other designs. And they're going to interact in weird ways that I can't really know that much about if I don't care about the context of where my thing is going to be. So we have a bunch of issues in our field. So as academics, we have a lack of data, and this is where Victoria is going to be super nice and share all the lift data with us. We have issues with scale hacking. I don't know how to express it differently, but like we've had, of course, methods for a long time where you take a few users and you use that as a way to understand what happens with many users. But when we come to this scale, to the scale of billions of users, how do we work with that? How do we scale hack that? That, I think, is a super, super interesting problem. It is also related to our own practice. Rather than us doing things as designers on our own and being able to control the whole thing, we see crowd design solutions. We see all sorts of ways of automatizing our profession, right? And so our design task is also now quite different. And we have to figure out how we fit into that ecosystem where we are controlled in many ways by these AI algorithms or ways of automatizing our profession. So we were sort of, when we wrote this up, we were talking about, for example, why then are we seeing these weird methods popping up in HCI? So I don't know if you've seen the design fiction work. Personally, I find it very problematic. So basically you make up a story about the future and then you sort of pretend that this is research, right? On the other hand, if we're going to take scale seriously, then we need to look at the interaction between what individual designs might do together with billions of users, together with AI, together with data, together with policies, together with the change of business models that Victoria spoke about the other day, together with the changes in the way we live our lives, that we suddenly don't own so much shit anymore, that we instead share it, right? And so this is where we did this one design fiction that sort of helped me change my mind slightly about design fiction. It was an IKEA catalog from the future. So in this IKEA catalog, you can buy all of these really nice interactive products. One, for example, is a bookshelf, the iconic IKEA bookshelf. But rather than buying a bookshelf, you're buying a blueprint, and then you get it printed on site, right? And you're paying a subscription fee, so you get content based on what you subscribe for and how much you pay per month. So suddenly we have this blending of the digital and the way that we do business in the digital with the physical. When you do a design fiction like that, you can also do things like notice that if everything is connected, very annoyingly, then maybe somewhere you want stuff not to be connected, like in bed, for example. So we made this fake bed that when you close the curtains, there is no connectivity. So avkopplad, deconnected. And then we talk about data. Now IKEA will own all of this data about you, where you sleep, how you sleep, in the beds of IKEA, when you slouch about in the sofa you bought from IKEA, when you do this, when you do that. And so the last page of this design fiction has this story about how IKEA is now going to do good by selling your data to other vendors in health and so on, in order to do good for the world. And this is where it gets creepy, right? So this is just one example of trying to figure out how to work with and do research on scale, understanding the scale of the change. I'm not so sure it's a good one still. And then for those of you who attended my keynote, you already know that I also care deeply about the fact that we are carrying technologies on our bodies or inside our bodies or parts of our bodies. And as these technologies come so close to the soma, to our intimate spheres, I think we need to change the way we do design, because I think this around the body is where a lot of politics happens. And we know that our bodies are changed by the technologies we carry on our bodies. So those were my 3 points. Power and scaling up, and bodies or somas as arenas for us to care about ethics for the future. Okay.
Thank you, Christina. Now I'll call Victoria.
I think I might be quite quick. Let's see what. No, thank you. All right. Yes, I'm Victoria Bellotti, and I'm a reformed academic now working in a startup in hypergrowth, where you can barely stop to think about these deep kinds of issues that the panelists are bringing up. And since I'm a reformed academic, I'm not going to have an academic position. I'm actually going to be the representative of the Silicon Valley tech industry, I guess, and just think about some of the problems that we're encountering as we move along so fast that we don't have time to stop and think about these deeper issues. We're just a company that's trying to survive and compete against other companies that are also trying to dominate in the transportation industry, which itself is disrupting probably more than almost anything else right now. It's a really crazy time in transportation. And we have to disrupt and innovate in transportation because we're in trouble with sustainable issues. You know, I mean, there's been recent reports saying it's almost too late. We've got to do something about transportation. We've got to innovate. We've got to, you know, save energy, not just transportation, but all kinds of ways in which we're using too many of the Earth's resources and producing too much pollution. So these are the kinds of questions that we're worried about. Is, you know, they're things that you have to do to survive as a company. But when Rachel invited me to this panel, I sort of had a sudden crisis. I was like, well, I'm not really being an academic anymore, and I don't really have an ethical position. But she said, you know, you've been around for all of this time, and you've seen all of these questions, you know, and it's true. Like, many of the questions that we have today have been questions that we've had for quite some time. And so you'll probably recognize these issues as not necessarily new, but they're ones that LIFT is confronting in its own way, but I've tried to generalize them for the panel. So, yeah, the first question is just about, you know, when we invent technologies, you know, you make something new, it's better, it's easier, it's cheaper, and so, you know, you've produced often a piece of hardware, or you've produced a piece of software or something, and then, you know, you're encouraging people just to use it, use it, use it, use it. And all of these innovations, you know, they're sort of competing for use, for our attention, and sort of selling stuff into the house. So all of these things, I mean, we're all trying to, like, get people to consume more, and every innovation wants to be consumed somehow. And so this sort of just raises questions about use of resources, and also thinking of attention as a resource as well. And, you know, so that's a troubling issue. And for us, you know, LIFT, we're kind of trying to figure out how to get more people into a smaller number of cars so that we're moving more people around more efficiently. But people aren't naturally inclined to do that. So, you know, for me as a psychologist, it's a very interesting problem. How do I persuade people to do things that they're not naturally inclined to do? And that includes sharing resources. So, you know, when you share your ride, it means you have to compromise. You might have to walk to be picked up. You might have to, you know, sit in the car with another stranger in the back, or two other people. Do you talk to them? Do you sit on your own and not talk to them? And so people, again, are not necessarily comfortable with sharing resources with other people. And it's going to be true for so many things. So in transportation, it's cars, bicycles, and scooters. But also, what about expensive pieces of hardware that we're all talking about, like robots in the house? You know, are we all going to have our own robot, or will we share robots? And the same thing as with space. You know, are we sharing our cloud storage space, or does everybody own a big chunk of it and not share it with other people? And then managing unintended consequences. So while transportation is being disrupted, we create solutions to problems, and then the solutions create problems of their own. And so that's often the case with tech in general, and it applies in particular to us. We're trying to get people out of cars and onto bicycles and scooters, but those are less safe. This is why people are wearing helmets, because we anticipate that they're not as safe, and people don't drive in their cars with a helmet on. You wear a safety belt, but you know, the risks of being hit by a car and being injured by a car on a scooter are much greater. The injuries are going to be much greater than they would be if you were in a car. And this also applies to other things, like especially in media and information technologies. So the consequences of getting really, really good at creating media, video, you know, artificial reality, for example. We're getting better and better at faking stuff now, and most recently, I think I mentioned this before, you know, it's possible to create fake videos where you can actually make it appear as though somebody is sitting there talking to somebody, saying things which never happened, you know. So I think you might have seen the one of Obama, and it's very convincing. It looks like he's sitting there talking about something that he never said. Same thing with surveillance technologies. This is one of my favorites of recent times. I've gotten really interested in robotics. Commercial robots are now starting to make it into the workplace. So there are delivery robots, and this is a security robot. You also can see them in some retail settings. So the kinds of things they do are checking inventory, or you know, sort of being able to be asked to show people to something. This one is a cobalt robot, robotics robot, and what it does is it just scans the workplace and makes sure that nothing is out of place. And they do, I think, you know, robots are supposed to help do things that are dull, dirty, or dangerous. But these are jobs that they're taking, and this is a concern. And in fact, you know, they're now saying that about 50% of all jobs in the United States are threatened by automation. So how do we ethically transition to a world in which more and more jobs are being taken over by robots or AI? That was going to be my 4 points. I just had a conversation yesterday with Kia, and we both came up with this other one, which is the bonus issue for today, is who has control? So as surveillance, quantification, and predictive analytics become ubiquitous, how much longer are we going to allow people to be the determinants of what they do? And, you know, how is control going to be taken away? Say if you want to eat cream cakes all day, but, you know, your health insurance company or your employer doesn't want you to. So like, for example, in Japan, you know, they're trying to kind of encourage their employees to be healthier and sort of taking measures to make that happen. And, you know, this will start to happen. We're going to be able to monitor people in huge detail as we have these sort of embodied technologies. And then, you know, who's going to be allowed to make the decisions when people are not as good at making them as machines are? Scary question. All right.
Thank you, Victoria. Now, Cecilia, please.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, colleagues of the panel. First, I'd like to thank Raquel and Eloisa and Marcela and Bianchi for this invitation, especially considering this topic, the relevance of this topic, and the 20 years anniversary of our community. So thank you very much. My 5 minutes have an acknowledgement of what this community have been doing, some picture of it at least, 2 questions for our reflection, and an encouragement for the youngers. So I'll try to get it in 5 minutes. Well, ethics is such a complex subject, isn't it? But everyone here is capable of recognizing when we have a situation, an issue, an ethical issue in a problem with technology. I will not talk about this because Virgilio has a lot of examples we saw yesterday. But the list is very long. Here I brought just 2 cases. The Benetton case, that was, they had a plan to mark a complete line of clothes with RFIDs, and this plan was boycotted by public movement. So the importance of our public action is very, very important. The similar thing happened to Adidas just after the World Cup in 2014, when they were marking the soccer t-shirts with RFID as well. And initially for logistics purposes, but then they were selling it in the stores without the knowledge of the customer. So it is not so difficult to see the list of problems regarding ethics we have. Besides the privacy concerns, the misinformation campaigns we are living today in Brazil for the elections, for instance. So I will not stay on that. Acknowledging the initiatives of our community along the time, just a snapshot of it here, I think that the grand challenges in computer science was remarkable as in the result of this discussion, we had one challenge, that is the participative and universal access to knowledge for the Brazilian citizen. And after this grand challenge event, I think that many other communities, including our community, the AGCI community in Brazil, was very inspired by it. And we had our own discussion on grand challenges for the Brazilian community of AGCI. After it, we have also other communities inside the computer science in Brazil that is doing the same. They are organizing events to discuss, to call attention of the community around the grand challenges. And I have there the grand challenge in information systems that was chaired by Claudius, that is a member of our community. And we can see in all of them the question of ethics. No? At least we are paying attention to it. We are sensible to it. For instance, the grand IGCI-BR, we have accessibility and digital inclusion as a big challenge. And we have the human values, and between the human values, for instance, post-mortem legacy, that is very, very sensible, chaired by Cristiano in his research. And you have ethics and design in the Brazilian context, very situated in Brazilian context. So I think it's very important for us to recognize those achievements. For the grand system and the grand challenges in information systems as well, we have ethical problems listed as one of the grand challenges. Of course, this is not. This is just a picture. Before it, we had. I remember in 2004 in Curitiba, in our event in Curitiba. I remember Carla Leitão talking to us about the necessity of submitting our research to a board of ethical committee. And nowadays it is a common ground for us, right? So, and even accessibility, it's before this discussion. It started before, but it's growing more and more in our conference. Besides the big events, I think that this also oriented the research of many people who are here regarding values. For instance, I think Roberto Pereira developed his PhD on values. I think that Luciana Salgado, just to name some, also had some concerns discussing about culture. So I needed to show you my view of those achievements. But I think that to move further, we recognize the problem, but to move further, I think we have two questions to discuss, to answer. One of them is this one. What do we understand by ethics? I think it is important to reflect on this. And as we are not academic philosophers here, I bring some concepts from a colleague, Clóvis de Barros Filho and Mário Sérgio Cortella. Both are philosophers, Clóvis de Barros Filho is a professor of ethics in the School of Communication Arts of the University of São Paulo. And Mário Sérgio Cortella, a very well-known philosopher. And they bring us some concepts that may be useful in answering this question. First, they say that ethics is not a finished knowledge. It's not a table of what I should and I should not do. Because if it were, the next day it would be obsolete, because everywhere we have new situations to deal with. So ethics is related to the freedom we have of choosing between alternatives towards coexistence. So the keyword is coexistence. So ethics for them, it's an intelligence shared towards improving coexistence. I think that is very important to think about. Also, they say that freedom is not it's a privilege, but also it is a source of anguish, because sometimes we have different choices to be made, and they are equally bad, and you have dilemmas. And values, you have to attribute values to the choices you have. And this is very complex, the complex in the Morin sense. And the ethics is intersubjective and social. We are social. So they say that ethics is not individual, ethics is not universal. The ethics is something that is in the social relationship of people. So we are affected by it, as even in our body, when we are sad, for instance, or when someone breaks some rule, some social rule. My time is finished, but I have a lot to say. The second question, is, with what philosophical basis do we approach the relationship of people and technology? I think we must think about it. Even not being philosophers, we must do it. My position, I can briefly pass through it. My position has to do with a view of designing systems that is beyond the technological artifact, because we have to consider in designing an artifact what is going on in terms of the formal knowledge that comes from society and that is incorporated in the artifact we are creating. So the system, the computer system, is just part of it. When you are designing something, you are not designing only the technical aspects of it. I have a lot of this in publications you may have seen from my students and from collaborators as well. But simplifying, I think that we need to pay attention to a systemic and situated view for technology design. And this means that we are talking about real people, interested parties, embodied people. And participation in co-design, for me, is a space for dialogue towards a better coexistence, as the philosophers are saying we must seek for. Okay. Raquel is here already, and this is the last slide. Just the encouragement for the youngers. First, be clear about the assumptions underlying your methodological choices. I think it's important. Second, remember that ethics is a continuous exercise in making choices to better coexistence. So ask yourself questions about what you are doing regarding contributing to this coexistence. And finally, I need really to encourage, because I know we have liberty and we have anguish, but also we have power of action for this better living. Thank you very much, Raquel, and sorry for it.
That's okay. Thank you, Cecilia. I was thinking, because many of you said about legislation, regulation, the review board, and I was thinking how weird it is that when we do research and we have to go through a review board for an ethics committee, and we're talking about, well, you're going to sometimes interview and observe 20 people using the technology. But we don't have, like, if you're creating a new technology that's going to change everyone's lives, it's okay. You just put it out in the world and let's see what happens. Now you have a review board for, okay, so Victoria's saying, no, I'm wrong, so I'll pass it to her. But if I'm wrong, I want to know how is it done and how is it reviewed, how it can impact people. Let me give you this one first.
Hi. Yeah, I actually used to be the chair of my IRB at the previous place where I worked. And, you know, that I strongly believe in ethics. But at LIFT now, of course, because it's commercial, and it doesn't have to follow these government guidelines, but it has other considerations. And, you know, I think probably the thing that's most, there's obviously the legal issues. So I've already been consulting with legal on stuff that we do. But also, we are very, very mindful that companies that are disrupting are deeply under the scrutiny of the press. And the press keeps a very, very astute eye on everything that happens. So even if something that's been happening in the industry, you know, like, say, a driver attacks a passenger, this has been happening in the taxi business, or passengers attacking drivers. This has been happening forever. But as soon as the same thing happens in a rideshare company, it's headline news. And so, you know, we're extremely mindful that everything we do has optics. And, you know, so, like, we really are being kept in line just by that. That's not to say that without the press we would just be off doing terrible things, of course. I mean, everybody there has very high ethical standards, and I'm actually amazed and impressed at how very, very ethical the company is. So, for example, you know, when I first started working there, I was amazed to see that all of the bathrooms have a little notice saying that, you know, LIFT supports, you know, transgender issues, and you should feel free to use whichever bathroom you wish to. You know, it's lovely to see something like that. So, you know, the people there, I believe, have high ethical standards. But yeah, we, instead of an IRB, we have the eagle eye of the press looking at us.
No, I just wanted to because I think it's an interesting tension. Just coming back to the question of power again. So what I was reading into Clarisse, the points that she was sort of putting in there is that computer scientists would have more power than others. I don't believe that's true. What I was reading into Virgilio's position is that politicians and regulations will have more power. I'm not sure that's true either. And what you're saying is that the media, the journalists, will have power in this development. I'm not sure that that's true either. And finally, you were saying that HCI people know about ethics and that we understand that. I'm not sure that that's true either. I think we should really reconsider and think about this carefully. Where is the society turning? And what are the forces of power that we should care about and align with? And whose values are we talking about? You know, so yeah, just putting that in, because I think any panel where people are agreeing is boring.
I think aren't true either. When you, Christina brought about the matter of scale, right? That we we're building technologies that are helping us reach a scale that we have never thought of. And I think this is where the power of computing actually comes from, right? Because computer artifacts actually reach places that we as individuals never reach, right? So it's like a demultiplication of ourselves throughout space and time. So I think that much of the discussion is about how far we can reach in terms of space. We can go where we haven't gone before, and Christina has emphasized, for example, that we may be affecting billions of people with technologies. The thing that I'm particularly worried about is that we are actually reaching time beyond our physical lives. Our virtual lives extend our lives beyond our physical existence. So I think that computer scientists do have a lot of power that they don't realize. And this is the problem that drives me into saying that we should be working with computer scientists because they create the possibility of building artifacts and technologies that are going to go where we can never go. So this may sound like something we have heard before, right? But what about that? The problem with computation is that it is a replicating artifact. So it goes where we haven't gone, but it replicates our behavior. So if we do data-driven research, for example, we are trying to extract patterns of what we have been. But we as individuals change, right? So if I have technologies that is trying to fit me back into what I have always been, I'm not sure I like that, right? Because this is bringing me back to a home where I want to get out of, right? So this is a problem, again, in terms of methodology, that the data-driven research that we have to do now with billions of data about people is about what people have done, right? And the thing that really worries me is that we are going really very fast on the quantitative research track, but I don't know where we are going with the qualitative track, right? I don't know. HCI has always relied on a lot of qualitative research. So what is it like today to do qualitative research if we have places that no human being can reach, and time that no human being can reach? And this is where the qualities are being changed. So I do think that computer scientists have a lot of power, and that they should absolutely know of it.
Well, I paid attention to all the talks here, and I tried to summarize the key concepts of the five participants of this table, and then I'm going to make a comment. And the key concepts that I identified in the talks were power, values, scale, body, surveillance, ethics, automation, and grand challenges. I would like to add another dimension of this transition from the material world to this connected world, which is speed. I think that speed should be combined with scale to make the problem more difficult. Let me give an example. In the case of the press has been reporting a lot of lynch mobs in India. And that is a consequence of not only scale, but speed. Because speed has an impact on the emotion of communities and individuals. Something that happens is immediately perceived by the community, and the action sometimes is not reflected by the people that is part of that. So it's, speed is another dimension of this big problem that we are trying to discuss here. And as a suggestion for the future, I would encourage the Brazilian HCI community to bring others for this discussion. I would invite people from humanities and social science for the next conference. We need to make this discussion more broader in terms of ideas and views. So that's a suggestion for the future.
Thank you very much for
comment on all of this. I think that it's important for us to make sure, or I don't know whether we are doing the right questions. For instance, scale. I don't know if scale is the right thing, right way of thinking it. Because scale has to do with generalizability, making it general. And I think that the situated, the more focused in specific groups, I think are more important. And regulation, I think should be doing by society or by this group. I don't believe in making it universal.
Okay, we have a question from audience, André.
Thank you very much for all of you for your very interesting views. They've been very inspiring for our discussions. I've been thinking about the topic that I'd like to see what your views are about, and building up on some of the issues, such as the power of computer scientists, designers. I've been doing a lot of research on accessibility for disabled people, and both researching user needs and designing technology, and on the view of designers and developers. I've done some of it in my master's, and I've done some now with another master's students of mine. And we've gone to developers and designers and asking them what are they doing, and we've seen a very important issue regarding accountability. So it seems like the huge issue that we have of things not being accessible to disabled people, we've seen a lot in this conference and elsewhere, and it's been like that for decades. It was very surprising to see that in 2018 it seems to be the same as when I did the same research 10 years ago. Now we focused on government, and we're bringing along some lawyers and public managers and all of that, following Virgilia's invitation. It's been very interesting, and we do need to do that. They've brought a lot of views that we didn't have. But what we have is they still don't feel that they can be held accountable for what they do. Or, as Victoria said, on companies, it's always too fast. We don't have the time, so we can't do it. We've been hearing that all over again 10 years ago. I'd like to hear about your views about how we can discuss with developers, designers about the power that they have in building technologies, and how we can let them know that they are held accountable. And not having things that we had. We had people from very, very important positions in government ringing my student's mobile phone, asking him to stop the survey he was carrying out. It was from a governmental IT agency. It was from one of the states. Asked, "Oh, I want all of the data from my people to be erased from your database." I can't do that. It's so anonymous. That's what happens. But that's something showing that no one wants to be held accountable for what they're doing in developing technologies. There was a particular point in accessibility, but I think it's the point when we talk about privacy, when we talk about other impacts that technology could have. So that, I think, is a very important thing now that maybe designers, developers are not thinking about. Thank you.
I'll say something super quickly about accessibility. It used to be the elephant in the room, crushing the porcelain. Sorry. It's really hard to make money out of people with disabilities. If we were to talk about, what is really going on here, it's not only accountability, it's also the fact that it's a small user group, so you don't make as much money. And that is, how do we deal with that? I don't know. Can I? Yeah, that's fight it out.
What she said, and so there's a philosophy in tech innovation, and you'll hear a lot of this in Silicon Valley, which is a crucible of where many of these startups that are dominating everyone's lives these days have come from. And the idea is that, and this is Eric Ries is actually the protagonist of this, is to do something that's very lean. So that you might have heard of the term lean startup and the concept of a minimum viable product. And so the idea is you push something out that does, just the bare minimum to test the market receptivity for what you're offering. And so it's just completely stripped down. And so it's not going to have, a lot of the features that might be helpful to certain niche markets. Anybody who's over 50 will probably understand what I'm saying when I talk about how, the teeny light grey text on a dark grey background, or these like teeny little icons, are designed for people in their 20s. And anyone who's starting to get presbyopia has real difficulty using a lot of these apps. So it's not, a large proportion of the population cannot access a lot of the design that's done. And as Christina says, it is just about, when you're a startup, you don't have a lot of money to invest in satisfying all of the needs. So you just try to hit the largest proportion of your user base possible. With the minimum number of features.
Well, regarding to your question about who is accountable for this or for that, I think that things are changing. Let me give you two examples, short examples. One is the GDPR in Europe. Companies will have to follow what the General Data Protection Regulation requires. So that we will see a lot of change in the future. In Brazil, a new law for data protection of personal data will be in place within the next 18 months. So we will see the impact of those laws on the development of systems, and I think that's a big change.
Since Andre, you mentioned that you started with accessibility, but you wanted to go beyond because you were thinking about any designer or any developer accountability. I think that it's what Christina has said, what Victoria has said, what Virgilia has said, and my bit is we haven't developed tools to help designers think about the reach of the meaning of what they are doing, right? Quite contrary, as one of my slides wanted to show, the education in computer science is to go into the abstract. So we're not trained, and there is no sexy appeal to designing tools that will make designers and developers think critically about what is it in the meaning of what they're doing that affects other people, right? So we don't have those tools. So maybe this community should be developing those tools.
Regarding accessibility, I think that the argument of market and profit and the difficulty the market has with different types of adjusting the product. I think that the problem is the way of thinking in accessibility. For me, the right way of doing it is to think about the design for all. So you don't need to have this this kind of market consideration, of a profit consideration, disappear when we are thinking in designing a product that is good for all the problem, all the possible, or at least in a large extent as possible. The product should be good for everyone. And the solution should be considered since the beginning, not after the product being done.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question here from the audience.
Hi. I'd like to ask you all, how do we sell ethics? And I don't know if we should be selling ethics, but as you mentioned right now about MVPs and about how, for example, diversity now is kind of a requirement for several companies to have and to think about. How do we do that with ethics? And should we be doing that? And how can we do it?
Thank you, Tatiana. I think that we shouldn't be selling ethics. Actually, society is demanding ethical conduct from us. So it's not a problem. I don't see it as a problem. I think that our problem is to respond to societal demands, not to create some demand, right? I think the demand is right there.
Well, I think that, as Clarice said, society will demand that. But if you look at the green economy, they sell the green economy. Companies are doing that, selling that they are following the green economy principles. I think that in the future we will see that for ethics and this kind of behavior.
I completely agree that ethics, we are not selling ethics, but society is demanding a position of us. And I think that there is a paper or something published about how to, or not how to, make your PhD visible in your PhD work. So I think it's important for everyone to have some notions about what, to be aware of what you think about ethics. Even not being an academic philosopher, we are citizens. We must have a position in life and in society to interact with people. So I think some good schools in the US and I think in Germany as well have courses of ethics for the computer science curricula. I don't know if this is a solution, but I think that we must know more about it. We must be aware of it.
I actually agree with you that we need to sell ethics. And I think that we have been through this once before. Suddenly companies were discovering that they couldn't sell IT products solely on usability, but they actually had to sell them on experience, that people were not going to buy shitty products anymore. They wanted something that was interesting and useful. And I think even though society is demanding ethics, users are demanding ethical products, I think that companies need to discover that they can make money out of it. That's where we need to be selling ethics. We need to show with our research or design processes or whatever that we can create stuff that people actually want. That's where the changes are going to come from. So, yeah, I agree with you. Let's figure out how to sell ethics. So, can I bring something else up and to be even more provocative? I think we need to work really hard with deconstructing some of the assumptions that we make all the time about what is good or bad about surveillance, or what is good or bad about privacy protection, and so on. And just coming back to some of the topics on the fake news and whatnot, 150 years ago, we could do loads of fake news, and people did all the time. And then suddenly we had photography, and it was amazing because he was telling the true story about something. This is just a blip in the history. Now we're going back to fake news again. We're going back to where society was. We have, in a way, a lack of history in our field to look at these issues. Or if you go to the topic of surveillance, I could argue that we should have more surveillance, because today people can travel. 150 years ago, they couldn't. They couldn't go anywhere without the priest in the congregation giving them a pass. And so they couldn't even go to the next village without getting the permission of somebody, some authority. And now we can travel everywhere. What are the consequences of that? Horrible consequences. We need more surveillance, less privacy, and so on. We need to go back to each of these ethical considerations, look back over history, and deconstruct our ideas about what it is and what it should be in the future. And I think we should definitely, as you said, bring in the humanities. They usually have this long-term perspective on these issues. History students should be part of our discussion here, and deconstruction is the shit.
We have one more question here. Before everyone.
Eu não consigo formular uma pergunta em inglês, então eu vou fazer uma pergunta breve, né, para poder alguém traduzir. Pensando aqui no slogan do evento desse ano, Interação, Criatividade e Cultura, eu queria também provocar e perguntar o que a comunidade brasileira de HC tem a ensinar ou a demandar da HC internacional, do mundo, sobre ética em HC. Ou seja, não só as dúvidas que a gente tem, mas o que a gente poderia ensinar.
Let me answer that one.
You are good in Portuguese.
Okay, so the question was thinking about the theme of this conference, which is interaction, creativity, and culture. Right? I was right. And the question was, what kinds of contributions contributions to or lessons from the Brazilian HCI community could get or give to the international HCI community, right? So what kind of trade, if you allow me to translate that, we could have with the international community. I think that looking at the Brazilian HCI community, at some point I remember some colleague in the UK and some other colleagues from Europe saying, well, this is very Brazilian HCI, you know, commenting on some comment that I had made. And he said, well, this is really very Brazilian. And I was wondering, what does it mean? I mean, what does he mean when he says that this is really Brazilian HCI? And one of the things, when I asked him back, what do you mean by that? And he said, you are all into this semiotic and cultural thing. You're asking these, you know, different questions. And I said, well, yes. Brazil is a case study. Brazil is a huge country, as we learn by traveling, you know, to and from Belém. So this is a huge country, and Brazil has been historically a very rich case study for anthropologists and all sorts of cultural scientists and sociologists, etc., and for semioticians. Right? So Brazil is really a very important place for semiotics. Why? Because we are diverse. We are such a diverse country, culturally and in every other respect. So one of the things that, I don't know about learning and teaching, but one of the things that we can exchange with the international community, I think, is to provide our European colleagues, for example, with a completely diverse setting and context of doing HCI. I'm sure Kier has never ventured into doing HCI in the Amazon. Maybe she'll come back and do it. But yeah, she says she would love to. So it's a completely different way of doing it. So our challenges are our very own challenges. And I think that just as our colleagues from other parts of the world come here and teach us about their experience with their cultures and the things that they find important, the way we can exchange ideas is to tell them, well, look at Brazil. Here we are.
I'm not from the HCI community, so I'm going to dare to make a comment on your question. I would say that HCI in Brazil has many specific challenges. Let me give you a concrete example. Let's take WhatsApp. It has been used by poor people, rich people. There is a huge gap between have and have not in Brazil. And that the same interface is used by illiterate people, literate people, people that has a lot of knowledge, people that just want to speak because they cannot write. So I think that there are many challenges that you find here can be used to other developing economies, India, Indonesia, many other countries in Asia, and also can provide some good lessons to our friends from the developed world.
Aren't you going to talk about corruption?
That's a hard topic. We have the elections coming up Sunday, so we don't want to. I'm going to ask, as I'm the moderator, the last question, because we're already over time. So about regulation and accountability, one of the things that seems to me like a huge challenge in developing technologies, like the doctors and lawyers, there's very clear what it's expected of them, what they can do, what they cannot do. And like civil engineers, if the bridge collapses, someone has signed the project and that person is responsible for that. But with technology and a lot of what we talked about it being developed by many people and put together and reused and this and that, where would the accountability fall? Like if a product does harm to someone, who is responsible? Is it the CEO? Is the one who developed it? Who are the people who are accountable for whatever problems that we have caused by technology?
Well, I know that many efforts, many initiatives in the US, I think IEEE, maybe Virgilio knows more about it. But they have several initiatives regarding discussion on algorithm accountability. I don't know if our community, the Brazilian Computing Society, is already in it. I think it's a very important aspect to discuss here in a situated way of doing it.
I think that's a really great and extremely tough question, and I think there's every situation in which harm comes to somebody, the role of the product in creating the harm is going to be different, and to a certain extent, you use your products responsibly, and so somebody driving a car can cause great harm, and is it Ford's fault if somebody driving a Ford motor vehicle hits somebody? What if it's a semi-autonomous Ford? Whose fault is it then? And so there's a sort of lot of gray areas. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the movie RoboCop, where the robot cop Ed 209 blasts somebody to death, and that's a very clear case where the product is, it does it on its own. But as products become more autonomous, then there's this gray area where it's not clear that it's the person using the product who's doing the harm, sometimes to themselves, say like, being addicted to Facebook and not getting on with your life, all the way through to a robot that does something, as a glitch. So I think that's what the courts are for, and ultimately a lot of these things just can't be easily disentangled, and there'll be arguments on both sides of the question.
So I agree with both of you guys. I just wanted to add something else that I've been thinking about quite a lot lately, and that is that if you train, as you say, if you train to become a medical doctor, or if you train to become a psychotherapist, for example, you learn certain ethics of your profession, and to be a professional in those fields, you have to do certain things and not others. We're doing experience design, and with my work, you know, coming so close to the body and the soma and the emotion and so on, it's really interesting that we have no training in how to deal with that, and also no training to deal with our own emotions and experiences as we're doing this kind of design work. So for those of you working with accessibility, for example, you come very close to people who have big needs, and sometimes you can't deliver, or what you deliver is not commercially interesting enough, so you can't sustain the beautiful solution you created with them. You can't sustain anymore, and so on. And it becomes very difficult for us. So I think it's interesting that you can be an experienced designer or an HCI person without having any training in what it means to be a professional, and how to get like a certificate or something that says that, yes, you are indeed somebody who will act ethically and morally, you know, value aware. That I think is interesting and problematic.
I think in my view, the answer to Raquel's question is that it's a research question. It's a lot of gray area about that. People do not know what to do. It has been a research topic in most of the law schools in the US. Who is accountable? Who is responsible? And again, my suggestion is bring lawyers to the next HCI conference.
Yeah. Well, they have said all the important things, so maybe I can add some anecdotal factor to it. And in 2008, when Carla Leitão and I were doing research for our book on methods, we were working with open source developers, right? And we were working with people who design Audacity, right? And it was interesting because we were trying to apply that semiotic engineering perspective in which we were trying to, you know, to elicit from them or to learn from them, what do you think you are doing? Why are you doing Audacity? What is your design vision? And I will never forget one of the first answers we got from a person who was very high up in the administrative scale in the entire Audacity development project. This person was saying, well, you're talking about design. There is no such thing as design. We're a community of people who react to the needs of development, of people who are, you know, interested in editing or high quality audio. Right? So there is no design instance. And I think that the accountability is absolutely depending on how and on what you think your software or your technology means to people. And this is typically a question that should come to the minds of designers, right? People who design software. And it's interesting because, you know, we often talk about development, software development, and, you know, what kinds of things we can do with development. But I think that in particular what Christina has just said, how come we are technology designers and we have never asked, you know, critical questions about how is it that we are impacting somebody else's life? I'm not talking about billions of people's lives, but somebody else, you know, your next door neighbor. How do you think? And we have, you know, many of us have been behaving like gods. Everybody is made, you know, in my image and resemblance. So I am, you know, this God-like person, and everybody else is like me. But this is, you know, this is egocentric approach doesn't work any longer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. Unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions or comments. We're actually over time a little. So I'd like to thank you all very much for your positions, for the discussion. I'm sorry we don't have more time. Note for next year, at least 2 hours for the panel. Thank you.